Hello children. Today's topic of our session is Pteridophyta. Till our previous lectures we have already dealt in Thallophyta, that are types of algae, and then we discussed about Bryophyta, and today we talk about Pteridophyta. Now Pteridophyta, they are also called as amphibians of plant kingdom as they require water for their fertilization, and they are, you can call them as like they are cryptogams. They do not have flowering stage in them. They reproduce with the help of spores, and they are actually the first land plants which have developed vascular system. So you can tell them that they are first land vascular plants. Vascular plants means they have got the presence of xylem and phloem, but they have little bit similar habitats when we talk about Bryophyta. They grow on cool, damp, shady, humid places. They need moisture to grow. Their dominant phase is sporophyte, and gametophyte is very short lived, but it is independent. Whereas in case of bryophyte, what we have seen, gametophyte is independent and sporophyte is dependent on it. But here in the pteridophyte, just opposite happens. Sporophyte is independent. Gametophyte is also independent, but it is very short lived. Once we are going to discuss the life cycle of it just now, we will come across it. So their dominant phase is sporophyte, and they are the first land animals to develop the vascular tissue, that is xylem and phloem. Let's move ahead. When we talk about the morphology part of these plants have root, stem and leaf. Now here we don't say root like structure, stem like structures, leaf like structure. They have roots which are very fine, adventitious kind of root system is there. Now they have, when we talk about the stem, in this case, in case of Pteridophyta, stems can be erect, they can be straight, or even they can be subaerial. That means they will be just present. You can see in the diagram with the word which is called as rhizome. Rhizome means just like on the rhizome means actually inside the ground. So they can be just present just below the surface, or even they can be present on the surface in the prostrate form, in the what you can say horizontal form also, and you can have the erect stem also. So stem are there with xylem and phloem. Leaves are present which are functioning as the what you can say the food manufacturing units for the plant. So these plants have now the characteristics of the advanced plants, that are angiosperms, which are considered to be the most advanced plants in the plant kingdom. If we move ahead, this is particularly, I just want to explain this whole thing with the help of this diagram. Now this diagram which you are showing is a diagram of a plant, a kind of a fern which is called as adiatum. Now ferns, I think most of you have seen it. Ferns which like long elongated leaves with very serrate margin, some notches are present. If you turn those leaves, behind those leaves you can find such kind of, you can say orangish color, small globule like structures. These are basically called as sorus. Sorus means which are having spores in it, and these sorus, the leaves on which they are present, the leaves are called as sporophylous. I'm just reading the slide. At maturity, the leaves are modified as sporophylls and bear sporangia. That means these sorus will have the presence of sporangia inside it. Inside the sporangia, the presence of the spores will be there, which will go ahead in the life cycle. Sporangia contain sporogenous tissues where spore mother cells undergo meiosis to produce the spores. Each spore germinate into multicellular free-living gametophyte, autotrophic in nature but is very inconspicuous, and it is called as prothallus. So the structure which you are seeing just now in this slide is the structure of a sporophyll containing the sporangia. Inside the sporangia, Sorus can be there. There inside the sorus, spore mother cells will be present. Spore mother cells will go for meiosis, and ultimately the spores which will be produced from this sporophyte will be haploid in nature, because meiosis, cell division, has occurred. And remember always, meiosis, whenever it occurs, it will reduce the chromosome number to half. So from diploid it will reduce down to haploid. So here also the spores which will be formed, they will be haploid in nature, and once those spores they will be falling on the ground, they will lead to the formation of a prothallus, which is going to be very small. It will be inconspicuous in nature. That will be we are going to see the diagram of it just now in the coming slides. So it is called as it is a type of a gametophyte, and it is called as prothallus. Let's move ahead. The reproductive organs are antheridia and archegonia, and they have sterile jacket layers of cells for the protection. After fertilization, the zygote develops into sporophytes which become independent. Now, you can see in this particular slide the formation of this is actually the whole life cycle of Pteridophyta. Let me explain it up. See, here you can see we can start from this leafy structure, where you can see this is which was in the original diagram in the previous slide. So behind the leaves you will have got the presence of those sporangia. So the leaves are called as sporophyte. Now inside that sporangia, the presence of spores will be formed. From sporogenous mother cell, spores will be formed, and these spores are liberated out. You can see the germinating spores, and this germinating spores will gradually lead to heart-shaped structure, which is the gametophyte. This is called as prothallus. Now inside this heart-shaped structure, towards the towards the upper side you can get the formation of archegonium, and towards the lower side you can get the formation of antheridium. And the sperm will be coming from the antheridium, and it will go and fertilize the archegonium, resulting into a zygote formation. Now we say gametophyte is haploid structure, so the sperm is also haploid, and the egg cell which is present in the archegonium is also haploid. So once they fuse together, they will lead to the formation of zygote. This zygote will develop into embryo, and then embryo finally will again develop into a small plantlet, which is sporophytic in case of pteridophyte. So whatever the diagrams which we are seeing in the previous slides, those are sporophyte stage of the pteridophyte kingdom. Okay, not the kingdom, pteridophyte category. So in this case, the sporophyte is diploid in nature, and gametophyte is haploid in nature. And diploid and haploid stages, they keep on alternating with each other. Like half life cycle of Pteridophyta is spent in diploid stage, and another half is spent in the form of which you can say one half is diploid and another half is haploid stage. Let's move ahead with it. This is one example which I have wanted that you should be studying a little bit separately from other examples of Pteridophyta. This is Selaginella. Now, in every category there is a type of a plant which you can say that is much more evolved than the remaining plants. Like in case of Bryophyta, we have seen Funaria. Funaria is much more advanced than the liverworts. When we talk about Selaginella, Selaginella is a kind of an example in case of Pteridophyte which have a little different characteristic features than the other types of plants present in this category. Mostly when we talk about pteridophytes, we talk about leaves which are very big in nature. I'm just reverting the slide. You can see here the leaves are big in size. But when we talk about Selaginella, you can see the diagram, you can see the photograph also. The leaves are very small. So we call them as microphyllous. Micro means small, phyllis means leaf. So they are small leaves. Next one. Sporophylls are arranged compactly into strobili or cones. Now again, till the previous slides, again I am reverting back. See, here you get the sporophylls, which are, the leaves are being converted into sporophylls. Behind the leaves, you will get the presence of sporangia. But when we talk about this Selaginella, you can see the cone-like structures which are present at the top. something very similar to gymnosperms, which is the next category after the pteridophyte. So the sporophylls they are arranged in the form of small cones or the strobili. Here the spores are heterosporous. Heterosporous means once from the sporangia, the spores will be released. There will be not only one type of spores, there will be two types of spores. So they are heterosporous in nature, whereas many of them, many plants in case of pteridophytes, they are homosporous in nature. Because that, why homosporous? Because they have got the presence of same type of spores. But in Selaginella, two different types of spores will be formed. So heterosporous in nature. Gametophyte is heterosporous species and it is dioecious. Here the female gametophyte remains on the sporophyte a step towards the seed habitat. Meaning what? That the sporophyte will be retaining the gametophyte inside itself. So once the zygote formation occurs inside the gametophyte, and from the zygote the spores will be formed, that will be formed inside the sporophyte, which has given the shelter to the gametophyte. So a kind of a, you can say a kind of a seed formation, where you can connect it to the angiosperm plants. Now in angiosperm plant, what happens? Once the pollination occurs and the fertilization happens, the female plant, the female flower, the when you can say gynoecium gets fused. That gynoecium retains the embryo inside, which gets converted into you have seed formation and then later on fruit formation. All those things happen in a plant. In case of angiosperm, nothing happens outside the plant. There is no separate entity. It happens in the plant itself. That is a seed formation state. Something similar at a very primitive level you can see in this case also, where the sporophyte will give rise to gametophyte, but gametophyte will not detach itself from the sporophyte. It will be present inside the sporophyte, and in the gametophyte the fertilization will take place, then resultant zygote will be formed, and from there the spores will be formed, but all into the sporophyte. A kind of a precursor for the seed developing process in the higher plants, other categories after pteridophytes, which will be studying further. These are some of the classes of pteridophytes: Psilopsida, Lycopsida. If you talk about the characteristic features, like Psilopsida, you have an example of Psilotum and Rhymia. And the main characteristic feature is that the plant body is divided into rhizome and the aerial parts, but they are devoid of leaves. Plus the sporangia, you can see in the diagram, they are axillary in nature. Axillary in sense they are present in between the branches, they are not present at the top. Another one, when we talk about Lycopsida, in case of Lycopsida, you can see the plant body is divided into root, stem and leaves. That is, so there are microphyllous leaves are observed, and they are dichotomously branched. Dichotomously means from a single branch, two branches will come. Again, two will divide into two. Like each branch will bifurcate into two structures. So that is dichotomously branched. And sporangium is aggregate of strobila. Here the example of Selaginella, which I said this is a unique kind of plant, it is there in case of Pteridophyta. When we move ahead, Synopsida, another kind of class in it. Example is Equisetum, and the characteristic feature is that the stem is jointed, and at the whorls of that, the joints where the joints are present, the leaves are present at that joints. Very fine leaves and scaly leaves are very much observed in this case. When we talk about Pteropsida, we have an example of fern. That means big leaves are observed. Mostly the macrophyllous leaves are there, though some small leaves, like when say in case of Adiatum, smaller leaves are also present, which are microphyllous in nature, whereas mostly in case of ferns, mostly we have big leaves which are there. Homosporous in nature, and formation of antheridium and archegonium, which lead to the formation of zygote, embryo, and finally the sporophyte. Now this is some different types of categories. Some type of ferns, they all are also present in water. So you can see the example like Azolla, Marsilia, then Salvinia. Yeah, these are some aquatic ferns. They are not only purely present on the land, some of them still live in water. So these are some of the examples of it. Lastly, I just want to talk about the whole life cycle. Just I'm repeating what I have told just now, that sporophylls are present. Inside the sporophylls, you have got the presence of sporangia. Sporangiasaurus is there. Then inside that, spore mother cells are there, which go for meiosis, and they will liberate spores. Now those spores will fall on the ground and a heart-shaped prothallus will be formed. Inside the prothallus, archegonia and antheridia will be developing. And from the antheridia, the sperms will be released and it will go and fertilize the archegonium, inside which the egg cell is present. The resultant zygote will be developing into an embryo, and then embryo gets converted into again a small sporophyll plant. So that is a kind of a whole life cycle which you can see in this slide. But in this case, what I want to add to it is that till the formation of spores from the spore mother cells by the process of meiosis, the sporophyte is diploid in nature. But resultant gametophyte which is formed from the sporophyte, that is, once the spores are liberated and they fall on the ground and they make a heart-shaped structure, that is haploid in nature. So basically the life cycle of pteridophyte is divided into 50-50 haploid and diploid stage. That is why the life cycle of pteridophyte is called as haplodiplontic life cycle. Now I'm adding a small video for a better understanding. Let us have a look at it.
Pteridophytes are true non-flowering land plants. It is so because they have developed root system which make them capable of absorbing nutrients from soil. They have leaf which help them prepare their own food. And they have vascular system which help them transport nutrients and food. Pteridophytes are seedless plants and thus are also called cryptogams. Similar to bryophytes, pteridophytes also have alternation of generation. But here, sporophytic phase is dominant, meaning most part of pteridophyte live in sporophytic phase. In sporophytic phase, plant grows root, stem, and leaf. Spores are produced in sporangium and leaf having sporangium is called sporophyll. Generally sporophyte produce very small size spores, also called microspore, or same-sized big spores, also called macrospore. Because of same size, these spores are also called homospores. But there are some sporophytes which produced different sized spores. These spores include both microspore and macrospore. Because of different size, these spores are also called heterospores. Spores give rise to gametophyte. Gametophytic phase lasts for very short period of time. After maturing, gametophyte produces multicellular sex organs, antheridium which produces antherozoid, and archegonium which contains an egg. Male gamete reach to female gamete through wind. As male and female gamete fuse together, zygote is formed which develops into a sporophyte. In this process, gametophyte completely disappears, and sporophyte develops into root, leaf, and stem. Sporophyte matures and produces spores, and this cycle of reproduction goes on.